Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't start as a fighter. I started as a spreadsheet. That was the joke I told at gun shows when people asked what I collected and why. On paper, I owned a small museum, bolt actions from 3 continents, a row of polymer pistols lined up by caliber, a few oddities I bought because I thought they were clever engineering, or because a particular proof mark made me smile. I kept everything in safes with desiccant packs, recorded serial numbers in a cloud drive and a hard copy binder, and rotated which pieces I took to the range like a librarian checking books in and out. I knew part numbers, production runs, torque specs for scope rings, and which magazines each platform preferred. I could quote historical trivia about certain designs and had a respectable collection of manuals. I could field strip anything I owned without losing detents. I thought that meant I was prepared. When the headlines started using words like clusters and transmission, and then stopped using polite qualifiers, I moved from my casual logs to a full inventory. I live in Aurora, Colorado, a few blocks west of South Buckley Road, a plain 2-story in a quiet cul-de-sac with backyard fences that matched because the HOA mandated them. To the north, there's East Iliff Avenue. To the south, Tallgrass Park and a row of townhomes. And east is Buckley Space Force Base behind its chain link and cameras. On a normal weekend, I might have driven to Cherry Creek State Park to watch boats skim the reservoir. On that Thursday night, just before midnight, I taped a clean index card to the front of each safe and wrote in thick marker what was inside and how much ammunition I believed I had for it. The operative word was believed. On day 1, I learned that owning a lot of firearms was different from having useful ones. The power went out at 2:26 a.m. I know the exact time because the microwave flashed it at me when it died and the neighborhood went black. In the next few minutes, the cul-de-sac filled with car doors and phone screens. I went to my office, unlocked the tall safe by feel, and grabbed what my hobbyist brain thought was a sensible first set. An AR-15 with a 16-inch barrel, a 2-point sling, and a white light. A 12-gauge pump shotgun with a short barrel and ghost ring sights, and a Glock 19 because if you have one gun that actually sees use in America, it's usually that one. I clipped the sling, checked a 30-round magazine, chambered a round, and stood in my hallway feeling the weight of 2 long guns and a pistol, and a sudden awareness that I was not in a climate-controlled lane at the range. The house smelled like gun oil and dust. The world sounded different without HVAC. Thin, sharp, too honest. The first knock wasn't a knock. It was a palm slapped against my front door urgently and then another behind it, faster. I looked through the peephole and saw Mr. Patel from 2 doors down. He runs the pharmacy counter at the King Soopers on South Aurora Parkway. He was still in his store vest with his name tag crooked and a surgical mask around his neck. 2 teenagers were behind him, one in a Broncos hoodie, one in pajama pants and flip-flops. "It's everywhere," he said when I cracked the door chain. "People are leaving their cars. Something is wrong with the hospital. My wife is with her sister in Parker. I need... Look, can you lend us something? People are banging on doors." I owned hundreds of firearms, and I understood then how little that meant. I could give him a pistol and 2 magazines, and 3 boxes of 9x19mm ammunition, but King Soopers would still be dark, and Parker Road would still be a highway parking lot, and even the best striker-fired pistol with a well-tuned trigger wouldn't teach him how to move, how to keep from flagging his own foot under stress, how to do anything but add noise to panic. I told him to come inside for a minute because standing in the doorway made both of us targets. The teenagers hovered on the porch, staring at the shotgun in my left hand as if it could decide for us. "I can lend you something if you stay here," I said. "At least until daylight. We can see what the city says." "The calls stopped," he said. His phone battery was at 2% and fading. The hospital line had gone from on-hold music to nothing. He looked small in my living room under the dead ceiling fan. By sunrise, 5 households were in my home or on my lawn. The Patels, a young couple who deliver packages for a living and knew every side street and 6 zip codes. An electrician named Miguel from the end of the block, and Sarah from across the street who works as an emergency medical technician and smelled like antiseptic wipes and exhaustion. I kept one long gun on a sling and the Glock on my belt and set the shotgun back on a table because the weight of everything felt like a bad plan. I brewed coffee on a camp stove and rationed it carefully. Our phones shook with the same emergency alert. Shelter in place. There were references to symptoms and a long list of don'ts. There was no mention of how many police officers had stopped responding. At 10:12 a.m., the first person ran down our cul-de-sac screaming. A woman in a suit who had lost one shoe sprinted full speed, glanced back at something out of view, and clipped the curb so hard she slid across the asphalt. She got up somehow and kept going with a limp. 3 more followed her at a distance. I won't describe what was wrong with them. I don't have to. You've seen enough old movies to imagine it, and anything you imagine won't capture the ordinary details. The smell of detergent on the suit coat, the paper badge from a parking garage flapping at her hip, the way adrenaline makes a voice tear the throat on every inhale. It doesn't take gore to make a scene feel real. It takes how it looks when someone doesn't believe their body is the same body anymore. We locked the door. We didn't argue about it. We watched through blinds. I learned my first practical lesson then. Window film is a better investment than most boutique triggers. I had installed a clear security film after a break-in years earlier, and watching hands slap the glass and leave only smears of sweat and grime while the pane flexed but did not shatter reminded me why thick plastic you never see is worth more than a third variant of a rifle you only admire. The woman in the suit ran on. The 3 walkers followed, and when they struck the glass and it held, they drifted away like moths towards noise elsewhere. The first 2 days are a blur in my memory, because everything I thought I knew turned out to be decoration on top of a simple question. Could I keep the front door closed, and could I keep people from robbing us when they realized we had something worth taking? My armory, which used to be a spare bedroom with tasteful, discreet furniture, became a mistake. Everyone knows where the gun guy lives, not because I bragged, but because over years you can't help it. Friends come over and ask to see a rare lever action. You load your car for a range trip and your neighbor sees. A package arrives with a vendor's logo and the delivery driver remembers the street. When there are rumors, and when the police stop picking up, and when hunger starts, neighborhoods update their mental map. Which houses have medicine, which have fuel, which have tools, which have guns. And then they update it again with a harsher truth. Which houses are safe to take from. On day 2 at night, a white cargo van rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac and stopped under the only streetlight that still worked. It idled there for a minute. The sliding door cracked. Someone in the passenger seat tapped a phone against the windshield to make a faint glow. I'd replaced my porch light with an LED motion unit last year. It clicked on, a hard white circle. The van backed up 2 feet, forward 2 feet, a little dance. I watched from the stairway mid-landing with the AR on a rest at the windowsill and the blinds barely open. The rail was my stable platform. I had a clear lane of fire through a tall, narrow window if I needed, but I kept my finger nowhere near the trigger because I am not in a movie, I told myself, and there is no referee. The van's driver finally eased away. You can call that paranoia, and maybe it was, but in the morning I found 2 sets of footprints on the frost of my lawn and a cigarette butt under the motion sensor with a torn wrapper tucked next to it. That was when I moved from polite host to barricade engineer. I stacked furniture in front of the first-floor windows, not because furniture will stop anything, but because it changes the math. A couch saves you 5 seconds. A bookcase buys another 10. I screwed 2x4 braces into the studs behind the front door so that it would not pop with a single kick. I moved my fire extinguishers from the garage to inside the kitchen and upstairs hall. I dug out the old battery-backed alarm siren I had retired years ago and wired it to a door sensor so that if someone forced the back slider, it would scream the way a house should. In those tasks, I rediscovered the thing my collection had disguised. My home was more important than any single item inside it. The hardware store knowledge, the little bracket that keeps a hinge pin from being lifted, the way a latch plate should be anchored into a stud instead of just jam wood, mattered more than which AR handguard was M-lock and which key mod. We layered noisemakers on the fence, a ring of aluminum pie pans hung with twine. If they rattled at night, we'd hear. It's cheap theater until theater makes someone pick a different yard. I set up a check-in by the front door for the people sheltering with me. At first, it was just me being me. A clipboard with lines for name, phone, medication needs, allergies, and a column labeled requests. It kept my brain occupied. It also gave me a way to say no politely when the request turned into, "Can I have a handgun, please?" The first time I said it to Kevin, delivery driver, kind, jittery, I heard myself and heard what I used to be. "A handgun isn't a magic key," I said. "You need to know where your finger is at all times. You need to know what you're willing to do if someone doesn't stop when you ask. You need to know how to keep control of it when your heart rate feels like a jackhammer. If you want to learn, sit with me in the hallway and we'll dry fire. We will not load anything until you can do everything without looking at your hands." It sounded like a lecture. He nodded like a student. He shook so hard the pen made dots across the page. Sarah, the EMT, kept us honest. She wrote a list of infection control rules on a whiteboard. Hand washing, masks if we had them, isolate anyone with a fever, establish a decontamination zone in the garage with a tub of diluted bleach for shoe soles and a table for wiping down anything that came inside. No one argued with Sarah. Not because she was loud, but because she was clear. She told us what she had seen in the last 24 hours and did not sugarcoat it, which was what I needed. I had thought weapons were the center of my plan. Sarah explained that routines were. If you brush your teeth and wash a coffee mug and tie down a trash bag at the same times each day, you remember that you can organize the world, at least within your walls. On day 3, I made my first serious mistake. I decided to patrol. I strapped on a plate carrier I'd bought because I liked the color pattern. I packed it with 6 loaded rifle magazines, 3 pistol magazines, a flashlight, a tourniquet, a small trauma kit, and a radio. I slung the AR across my chest, cinched the sling tight so it wouldn't swing, and added the pump shotgun because my head made an argument about options. By the time I reached the end of the cul-de-sac, I was sweating under the carrier even though it was 41 degrees Fahrenheit and crisp. My breath fogged my glasses, which I wiped with a glove that left streaks. The shotgun had nowhere comfortable to go. It knocked against the rifle. Every ounce I had carefully chosen in my consumer life became a pound I hated. I walked 1 block and felt like I had been hiking uphill for an hour. I heard a metal clatter and froze, shouldering the rifle as if that would drain lactic acid from my legs. The clatter was a wind-tossed trash can lid. I returned home with my shoulders burning and my patience shortened, ashamed. I wrote in my logbook that night, "The weight is lying to you." The next day I stripped my plate carrier down to 1 rifle magazine in the gun and 2 on my belt, the Glock on my hip with 2 spares, a compact light, the tourniquet, and a small multi-tool. The difference felt like daylight. On day 4, the first misfire. An old lot of Russian .223 Remington that I'd bought years back because it was cheap to shoot on weekends. At the time, I had shrugged at lacquered cases and inconsistent primers. On a closed range, a click instead of a bang is an annoyance, and a chance to practice clearing drills. In a dark hallway, it's a punch of cold fear. I transitioned to the pistol smoothly in slow motion like the videos, only my hands shook and my front sight looked fat and blurry because adrenaline makes small things coil away from your vision. The hallway was empty. The misfire was nothing but an embarrassment. But I took the rest of that ammunition and locked it in a separate container marked with tape. Only if desperate. I had never thought the word desperate would be a label on my own shelf. I started keeping a reliability log on each magazine, counting the springs that felt soft, the followers that tipped, the ones that ran clean. The story you tell yourself about capacity is not the story your springs tell you after a decade in a drawer. On day 5, I stopped being the gun guy and started being the boring sign-out clerk. I made a decision that felt like betrayal of everything my collector's heart loved. I would lend a very small number of firearms to people staying in the house, but they would be the simplest and most reliable, and they would come with rules that made me sound like a school principal. I chose 3. 1 Glock 19, 1 12-gauge pump, and 1 rimfire rifle, a Ruger 10-20 with simple iron sights. Because for most of the tasks we faced, popping a lock on a shed for a neighbor to get their supplies, deterring a raccoon from the compost, teaching a calm trigger press, that .22 did more good than any of my exotic calibers. If someone asked for something else, I said no and meant no. They signed the clipboard each morning and checked each weapon back in each night. They matched serial numbers. They counted their rounds. It was an armory of 3 items issuing to 5 adults, and it kept us from turning into a danger to ourselves. On day 6, raiders finally came. It makes them sound grand to call them that. They were 2 men in a battered sedan with a cracked windshield and a back seat full of what looked like lawn equipment. They parked at the mouth of the cul-de-sac and walked side by side, slow but purposeful, heads turning to check windows. One carried a crowbar. One had a short, stubby shotgun. I know shotguns well. This one was cut too short, with a taped-over front sight and a finish worn to silver along the receiver. I watched them through the upstairs window, the AR resting again on the banister. "We could call out," Miguel said from the landing behind me. "Ask what they need." He didn't say, "Please don't start something we can't finish," but I heard it. I did not want to start anything, and I did not want them to knock. I turned on the porch floodlight in the day. The sudden square of bright made them look up, shields to their eyes. I hit the siren. The house screamed. It's amazing how a 15-year-old alarm unit wired to a sensor can project confidence. The one with the crowbar looked at the one with the shotgun. The one with the shotgun turned, not afraid exactly, but calculating. They walked back to the car and left. I recorded the make and partial plate in my log and put a dot on the map I had drawn of our block, circle at the cul-de-sac mouth. I was still learning how to be a person who invests in lanes of denial more than in confrontations. On day 7, ammunition became the new currency. The couple who deliver packages, Kevin and Tiana, brought back news from their early morning walk. The sporting goods store on South Parker Road had metal shutters closed and a handwritten note taped to the inside of the glass reading, "Closed. No stock." A pawn shop a mile away had been looted. In the bushes out front, scattered brass and empty plastic ammo trays glinted in the frost like a grown man's Easter. People weren't shooting for defense there. They were shooting for the feeling of having power in their hands. It's easy to deride that when you're safe. It's harder when all the unseen systems that keep food and permission flowing start to seize up. I see it differently now. Fear makes you want to feel like the protagonist in your own life. Noise and flash grant that for a second. The bill arrives later. I counted my ammunition that night and confronted an awkward truth. My distribution of calibers had been curated for a hobby, not for a crisis. I had plenty of 7. 62 by 54R for the long heavy Mosin I kept for history, and because I liked to knock over steel plates with a cartridge that smelled like a museum. I had a nice stash of .41 Magnum because finding those cartridges had become a game. I had a surprising amount of birdshot for the shotgun because clay pigeons are cheaper than therapy. What I did not have enough of, if enough, means sustainable use in defense and training for multiple adults for an unknown number of days, was common 9x19mm and decent 5. 56x45, that ran clean. I had focused on variety and neglected volume. On day 7 I made a rule. No more range toys. No more oddball calibers. No more attachment to a rifle because the bluing looked like a lake at dusk. We set aside the AR as primary for perimeter work, the Glock as primary pistol, the 10-22 as trainer and utility, and the shotgun as a reserve. Everything else was behind a layer of locks and the heavier layer of my own changed mind. On day 8, we started training. It's funny to write that because it makes it sound official. It was a set of chairs in a hallway. It was dry fire with chamber flags and triple-checked clears. It was me, who used to lecture with enthusiasm about history, trying to shut up and show hand positions and a simple up drill with a part-timer on a phone. It was Sarah insisting that before any trigger press, we practiced verbal commands. Stop. Back away. We don't want trouble. I had owned a lot, but I had not practiced enough that my mouth could do that under pressure. We practiced malfunctions with dummy rounds because the misfire had burned a lesson into my brain. If your platform isn't second nature, your first nature, panic, will take the wheel. We practiced reholstering deliberately, not fast, because the world is full of stories about well-meaning people who shot themselves reholstering. We drilled simple movement in the kitchen. One step off the line, not a dance, a step. We didn't do fancy room clearing. We didn't stack. We moved like adults who wanted to live. On day 9, a father and son arrived at our fence. The father carried a lever-action rifle. The son, maybe 13, carried nothing and tried to look smaller than he was. The father asked if we had a gun to sell. There is a kind of stillness that comes when you realize you have been rehearsing a conversation in your head and now it's on your lawn. I said we were not selling. I said we were trying to keep the block quiet. He said they had been stopped twice in the last mile, once by a man with a kitchen knife who had darted away when the father showed the lever action, once by a group of young men who had laughed at the rifle like it was a costume. He asked again if I had a pistol, any pistol, and he gestured to the son. I had a dozen I could have spared if we were measuring only in objects. We were not. I told him about dry fire. I told him about neighbors watching out for one another and staying put when moving was more dangerous than sheltering. It felt like a lecture I would have delivered at a gun club meeting in calmer years. He stepped back like I had turned into a door. People do not want a theory when the world narrows to a hand on a boy's shoulder and a long walk. I gave him a can of soup and bandages and we watched them go. I still think about that conversation. This story is not clean. On day 10, discipline was our only real weapon. We made a schedule, awake at 6:30 a.m., coffee rationed to 1 mug each, breakfast of oatmeal or something like it, then quiet chores, then training, then a midday block where 2 people watched the street while everyone else slept. Then in the afternoon we inventoried and cleaned and did the tiny maintenance items that the old me would have deferred because I liked the gleam of oil more than the boring task of seating a loose sight screw with thread locker. We kept logs. We wrote down each round expended, each round found. It's not romantic, but math is the cure for panic. We rationed batteries like gold. We turned off the porch light unless we were using it to manage a person's behavior at the edge of our property. We kept indoor lights minimal at night and used blackout curtains in the front rooms. Noise discipline wasn't a tactic we practiced in a class. It was the natural consequence of living next to people who made noise when they were hungry or angry, and of seeing how sound traveled through a neighborhood that had traded traffic hum for human voices. On day 11, the first injury, a cut on Tiana's palm from a splintered fence picket she tried to fix too fast. It bled more than a cut should because she hadn't eaten enough and because cuts in the cold do that. Sarah cleaned it, irrigated, dressed it, and lectured the rest of us about gloves and pace. The cut healed. It was a minor issue. But it taught us the timeless lesson that what takes you out during a crisis is not necessarily the dramatic event on the news. Sometimes it's the small accident that you shrug off because you're tired, and then it gets worse because you're still tired tomorrow. On day 12, I started marking magazines with a paint pen, not because I liked how they looked marked. My collector's eye actually hated it, but because I needed to track which ones caused problems. I had half a dozen 30-round polymer mags from 2 different manufacturers, and an even larger handful of aluminum USGI mags with springs that had lived compressed for years. On the range, I would have rotated them, loaded them to 28 rounds because that's what a mentor told me once without explaining why, and used whichever one was nearest. In my home, on day 12, I labeled them 1 through 14 and kept a tiny note next to the rifle. 2-9, feed lip wear, do not use for defense. It seems boring to write this, but it's the way the world changes when you stop being a customer and start being a caretaker of what you have left. On day 13, I made a mistake with the light. I pointed the rifle light out the window at motion and forgot that glass reflects. The beam threw my own face back at me and also painted a rectangle on the ceiling that was visible from the street. It's a small thing, but small things are how you get found. That night, I taped a strip of cardboard along the top edge of the window inside to shield the ceiling from spill. It looked goofy. It worked. On day 14, the door knocking came again. A different rhythm from a different group. 3 men in work boots and Carhartt jackets. 1 carried a baseball bat. 1 carried nothing. 1 had a pistol tucked into his waistband at 3 o'clock, no holster, muzzle pointing straight at his own hip. We did not let them in. We spoke through the door. We kept the conversation short. They wanted to borrow food because their neighbor had moved out in a hurry and won't miss it. They tested the way we responded to the word borrow. I said we were stretched thin and that more people with us meant less for everyone. It sounded selfish. It was the truth. You can't hand out your way out of a problem when you aren't a warehouse. They walked away after standing in the yard for an extra minute just to show they could. That night, I added 2 more braces behind the back door. On day 15, we tried something big. A neighborhood meeting, small and fast, daylight only, in the center of the cul-de-sac where we could see all paths in and out. 12 people came, then 16, then 20. We kept distance. We kept voices low. We established a block watch for 3 nights and decided on a signal. 3 quick flashes from a window if someone needed help. Not because it's fancy, but because everyone with a flashlight can do it. We drew a simple map and assigned zones of observation. North, south, the alley, the park edge. We wrote down the addresses of people who might need a knock if smoke rose from their roof or if the porch went quiet for too long. In a different life, I would have called it tactical. In this life, it was just neighbors who wanted to sleep without jolting awake at every bump. On day 16, the grocery store across Elif looked like a Hollywood set. Carts on their sides, aisles torn, shelves partly stripped and partly ignored because panic does not read labels. People had left behind things that required too much preparation. They took snack food and left dry beans because dry beans are the kind of work that doesn't look like food when you're scared. We did not enter the store. We didn't need the calories enough to risk the fight that always happens in a space like that. Kevin and I pulled a pallet of bottled water from behind the loading dock where it had fallen under a tarp, and we moved it down the alley, one case at a time, in a wagon we had used to move mulch in a calmer spring. We left a note on the door for anyone else. Water on alley by the elm, take 2. It felt like tempting fate. It also felt like hedging against the future where fewer desperate people want your stash. On day 17, my AR malfunctioned again. This time, a failure to extract from a magazine that had always been fine. It was my fault. I had run the gun dirty for days because I was conserving solvent. My cleaning had been spotty and done at night when my eyes burned. That morning, I disassembled the bolt and found carbon everywhere and a tiny chip on the extractor claw. In pre-outbreak life, I would have said, and ordered a replacement from a favorite vendor. In Outbreak life, I had one spare extractor packed in a small parts kit for someday. The someday was now. I changed it and put the chipped one in a bag with a label. I learned again, the parts you ignore are the ones that take you off the field when the field is your hallway. On day 18, Sarah asked to borrow the shotgun for a home visit to a neighbor who had been on insulin and was now delirious. She didn't want the shotgun for the neighbor. She wanted it for the street between our houses. We argued quietly because I wanted her to take the Glock and because I didn't want the shotgun leaving the house. She won. She always won when the conversation touched anything medical because she understood risk like a surgeon understands the edge of a blade. She returned a half hour later, eyes wet but calm, and she cleaned the shotgun as if the act could polish the world back to normal. That night, we moved our medical kit to a more accessible spot and added items to a list we could not fill. More gloves, more masks, more saline. On day 19, the odd calibers became a tax on my psyche. Every time I opened the safe, the rows of things I used to love looked like a clever hobby that had gotten in the way of families that needed us. I packed most of my collection into the deepest safe and spun the dial with a feeling like closing a chapter. I left out only what I knew how to maintain blindfolded: the AR, the 10/22, the Glock, and the 12-gauge. I added a bolt-action .308 with a simple fixed-power scope, because if we needed to watch the park edge at distance, clarity matters, and a single-plane rifle that proved 0 once and held it had a roll. I stored it unloaded with the bolt out because discipline is a habit you either live or pretend to own. On day 20, the van returned. Not the same white one. A different van, blue, with a ladder rack. 2 men again. They parked sideways at the entrance to our cul-de-sac, blocking it. This time, instead of approaching a house, they honked twice and waited. The sound brought out curiosity, and curiosity is the enemy of quiet plans. Heads appeared in windows. A door opened halfway. The driver stepped out and called, "We're offering rides to the shelter at the high school. Supplies there, security. We'll pick you up again tomorrow if you need to come back." He gestured like a game show host. The words sounded good. They sounded practiced. No one from the city had come down Elif to hand out flyers. Kevin whispered, "This feels wrong." The driver added, "We can only take you if you have something to contribute. Tools, generators, weapons. You'll be safer with us." It was then I understood the pitch: consolidate resources by trick, not by force. I stepped out onto my lawn with the AR slung but not in my hands, and I said, "We've already organized here. If there's a shelter, we'll walk tomorrow in daylight." The driver's mouth tightened. He made a show of shrugging. They left after 5 more honks. That night, we updated our watch schedule and agreed on a rule: we do not take rides. On day 21, the first real fight happened a block away. I will not describe it. No one died on our street, and that mattered more than the details. What mattered was how it changed us. We had thought we were cul-de-sac alone. We were not. Our decisions changed what happened to the next street and the next. Discipline is contagious, but it does not spread as fast as panic. We kept to our signals. We did not run toward noise. We did not chase. We called out warnings and went back inside. It felt cowardly. It was survival. On day 22, the radio finally brought word that was more than rumors. A local amateur operator on a community net set a schedule at the top of every hour to read messages from other neighborhoods. He was 2 miles away in a ranch house he had turned into a tower of wires. He spoke clearly. He said the shelter at the high school was real but crowded, overwhelmed, and run by volunteers who had not slept. He said the fire department was stretched to breaking and needed help keeping hydrants clear for 2 blocks around any structure that was burning. He said the police were operating in teams that shifted locations every few hours. He said if you had a generator, use it sparingly. He said if you had tools, fix leaks before they become floods. He said wash your hands. The radio voice did more for our morale than any show of force could. On day 23, a child on our street developed a fever. The house took on a hush like a church. Sarah did what she could with fluids and cool cloths and words. The fever broke. The child slept. The parents cried in the driveway at 2 a.m. because that's what relief sounds like when it has been absent. You might wonder why this isn't a story about a gun collector. It's because it was when I stopped thinking of myself as a man with a set of items and started thinking of myself as a member of a small city inside a set of fences. On day 24, I tried to sell 2 rifles to a man who had cash. He had heard I was the guy. He arrived with a roll of bills and a look like he had bet everything on my answer. I told him I wasn't selling. He said he would pay triple. He offered me a generator. He offered me spices. He offered me a family heirloom watch. I said no. He cursed me and left. I sat in my office afterward and stared at the closed safe and understood that this was what the last week had built me toward. The ability to absorb a stranger's anger without letting it change my plan. Restraint isn't noble. It's the muscle that keeps you from doing something you can't take back. On day 25, I organized my last cleaning of the collection as a collection. I took each remaining weapon I had kept accessible and cleaned it thoroughly, logged round count, replaced parts if I had spares, and established a specific place for each. AR on the upstairs landing, unchambered but with a magazine seated, Glock in a quick-access lockbox by my bed, shotgun in the hall closet, conditionally ready, bolt action in a case under the couch on the 2nd floor for observation, 10-20 seconds in the kitchen pantry because sometimes you want a tool, not a hammer. I placed ammunition in 4 sealed containers in different locations. I stopped telling myself that any new addition would be helpful. I stopped browsing my mental catalog of wants. The desire that had powered years of hobby cooled under the gravity of a simpler truth. It will never be the hardware that saves you. It will be the choices you make under pressure. On day 26, we had a visitor with a badge on a chain that no longer had jurisdiction over anything but still meant something to the person wearing it. A police sergeant, red-eyed, polite, asked if we had seen a specific missing person. We had not. He asked if we had any spare batteries. We did. We gave him 2. He pointed to the pie pan noisemakers on our fence and smiled like a coach seeing kids using a drill he used to teach. He told us that our block looked good. It was the kindest thing anyone had said in weeks. It made me sit taller for an hour. On day 27, we thinned our possessions. It sounds like minimalism practice, but it was more like triage for objects. We made a pile of things we could trade and things we could give away at a meet point down the street at noon. Extra winter jackets, a stack of old children's books, a box of pencils and paper, a camping cook set we had duplicates of, and yes, one small bag of mixed ammunition and calibers we did not own anymore that could be useful to someone else. I wrote a note in the bag, "Mixed calibers, check carefully." It was a little act of conscience in a world that asked you to be lazy. On day 28, Kevin knocked on my bedroom door at 3 a.m. "There's someone at the back fence," he whispered. We moved quietly to the second floor and looked. A figure stood at our fence, rocking it gently as if to test the posts. The pie pans clinked softly. We turned on the back floodlights and the figure stepped away, then back again like an animal working against a boundary. I called out that we were home and awake and that we had nothing for anyone at this hour. The figure stood another minute and then moved on. I realized as I watched them go that my heartbeat stayed below panic. Not because I am brave, because repetition had made us a team of adults who could move without stepping on each other's feet in a narrow hall. On day 29, I wrote a letter, not for a reader, for myself. I listed the weapons I kept and why in one sentence each. AR-15. Reliable, common parts, light, accurate, familiar manual of arms, capable of defending a corridor or a yard. Glock 19. Compact, common, reliable. I know its trigger like I know my front door latch, easy to keep on my body while doing chores. 12-gauge pump. Versatile, a psychological deterrent even when no one hears it. Good for certain close problems. Limited range means limited unintended consequences. Ruger. 10-20 seconds. Utility, training, small jobs, calm. It turns fear into a focus on fundamentals. Bolt action .308. Observation and deterrence. The presence of it means you don't forget the long view. It felt like an oath. It felt like subtraction done right, finally. On day 30, I walked the block at sunrise with no plate carrier, no shotgun, just the AR slung close and the Glock on my hip, and I checked in on the chalk marks we had made at the edges of properties. Small coded symbols that signified we're home, we're okay, or need help. All the marks said okay that morning. The air was cold enough to crisp my nose hairs. The sky, the thin winter blue that makes you think of school mornings and not crisis. I thought about the first week and the second and all the ways I had failed and learned. I thought about my collection, about the joy of a well-machined part and the quiet thrill of owning a piece of history you can hold. And I did not feel shame for loving those things. I felt gratitude that the same curiosity that made me learn diagrams and torque values also let me learn where to put a couch, how to label a magazine, how to step aside when a conversation outside is bait, how to say no without turning it into a fight. I had started as a man who could tell you which factory hammer left which telltale mark on a sear. I had become a man who could tell you that discipline is lighter than any gear you strap to your chest, that restraint is a tool you keep sharpened quietly, and that a handful of reliable items you actually train with beats a wall of cleverness you admire. That afternoon, I opened the heavy safe that held what used to be my pride, and I took out exactly one thing I had ignored: a blank notebook. I wrote Armory Log on the cover, not because I needed another list, but because I wanted the next 30 days to be about practice, not prestige. Below the title, I wrote 3 rules. Rule 1. Carry only what you can move and think with. Rule 2. Maintain what you carry. Rule 3. Use words before you use anything else. I taped those rules inside the pantry door where the 10-20 seconds leaned. I wrote them on a card by the upstairs landing where the AR rested. I slid a smaller version into the lockbox with the Glock. I did not tape one to the shotgun because if you touch the shotgun, you already know what hour it is. People like to say that being armed saved them. It's a neat headline. It makes for a satisfying story. I can't say that. I can say that being armed gave me options, and options without discipline make a fool of you in front of your neighbors and in front of your fear. The thing that saved us was a schedule written in pencil and obeyed because we chose to be boring. The thing that saved us was turning down rides that sounded official but didn't feel right. The thing that saved us was a floodlight, a siren, a polite no, and the ability to let someone else leave without proving anything. The thing that saved us was a short list of reliable tools I could name in my sleep, and a longer list of things I didn't do because I didn't need to. I still own more firearms than a person needs. That sentence used to make me happy. Now it makes me careful. If someone knocks today and asks if I have a spare, I will say no with the steady voice of a man who learned the hard way that tools without practice are noise. If they ask what I do have, I will tell them about the whiteboard with the schedule, the buckets of water near the door, the gloves in a bin by the fence, the pie pans that sing, the neighbors who flash 3 times when they need us. I will tell them about how we cleaned hinges and reseated latch plates and moved to the couch because 5 seconds matter. I will tell them we trained with an empty chamber more than we shot paper. I will tell them that if they join us, they'll be given a broom first, not a barrel. At night now, when it is quiet, I go to the back bedroom and look at the fence line. The pie pans sway in softer winds. Far off, east, the low light of Buckley's perimeter shines through the cold. I can hear, if the neighborhood is really still, the hum of a generator 2 streets over, and the muted voices of a family telling a story without using names, just shapes in the air. Sometimes I take the bolt action out of its case, wipe it down, and put it back without opening the safe to touch the others. It is a way of telling myself that I understand the difference between the old me and the new me. The old me collected because of the small pleasures that are real. Good steel, knurling that fits a finger, the sound of a bolt closing like the door on a bank vault. The new me keeps 4 tools clean and a set of rules cleaner, and when I pass the safe I nod to it like you nod to a museum after you've left. Thank you for what you taught me, and also I have somewhere else to be. Day 30. Ended the way I wanted. Dinner at 6 p.m., lights out at 9 p.m., watch handed down at the top of the hour. I slept with the window cracked for fresh air because the smell of oil and old dust had finally faded under the smell of cooked rice and candle wax and clean clothes hanging near the vents. When I woke at 5:45 a.m., the sky in the east was just starting to think about pink. I boiled water, counted 4 mugs, poured coffee like it was a ceremony. I wrote in the log, "We made it." I didn't add exclamation marks because we weren't done. We were just through the first round of lessons, and the face in the microwave when the power flickered back on for a minute and then off again, my face, older by a month, smiled because it finally knew what it didn't need. The collection didn't save me. It taught me what to let go of. The weapons didn't save me. The way I carried them, maintained them, and put them down when a softer tool would do. That's what kept the door closed, the lights dim, the nights mostly quiet. I'm not as sentimental about steel now. I am sentimental about neighbors who learned how to flash 3 times and how to keep their voices low. I am sentimental about pie pans that sing at the right times, about a siren that still works after years in a box, about a pair of gloves placed where hands will reach for them, about the chalk marks that say "okay" as the sun hits them each morning. I am a gun collector who survived the first 30 days, not because I was armed, but because I learned I had to be something else first, organized, patient, and willing to be boring. The hardware became simple after that. A handful of reliable tools, a list on a door, a refusal spoken gently, a steady breath behind a pane of glass that doesn't break when a hand hits it. If I keep that, the next 30 days will be just as survivable. And maybe This is as close to hope as I allow myself. I will open the safe in spring and see not a museum of mistakes, but a reminder of a lesson learned exactly once and held tight. Discipline weighs less than fear, and restraint is a better optic than anything with glass. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.